Hello and welcome back to the Electronic Intifada's live stream for Thursday, June 5th. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleagues Ali Abunimah, Jon Elmer, Asa Winstanley, and Tamara Nassar. It's day 608 of Israel's genocide in Gaza. Coming up, we'll speak to veteran human rights lawyer Craig Mokhiber. He'll update us on the international legal and political efforts to bring accountability for Israel's crimes. And we'll discuss the Gaza Tribunal, a people's tribunal which just held its opening public sessions in Sarajevo. Later on in the program, Jon will bring us up to date on the latest resistance news from Khan Yunis and Shujaiya in Gaza, and he'll analyze the ongoing Yemeni missile attacks aimed at disrupting Israel's airports. But first, let's take a look at the news. Here's a brief summary of some of the latest developments this week in Palestine. In Gaza this week, Israeli forces have massacred more than 400 Palestinians and injured more than 2,000 in the last 7 days in airstrikes, tank shellings, drone attacks, and with sniper fire. Attacks continued against hospitals, medical clinics, residential buildings, schools turned into shelters, and inside humiliating death traps engineered by U.S. mercenaries and Israeli soldiers under the guise of distributing meager amounts of snacks to millions of starving people, while real international aid remains in trucks stuck behind the crossings for more than 3 consecutive months. Nearly 100 Palestinians were killed and 440 injured between Tuesday and Wednesday alone, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry in Gaza. On Monday, June 2nd, Israeli airstrikes flattened a home in Gaza City, pinning a baby and his 5-year-old brother beneath the rubble. This clip, filmed by Al Jazeera reporter Anas al-Sharif, shows the moment the 2 children were rescued by Palestinian first responders and civil defense workers.
الحمد لله طلع الولد ايوه يلا يا بيضان انت تخفف هات لي شاكوش ادي لابوه اعطيه اللي عندك ادي اللي عندك طلع البنت اول لا يا حبيبي يلا هنا نطلعك والله ما نطلعك هنا طلع المرة نروح نحاول نحط خشبه تمام على السياخ هنا ونحاول نرفع وننزل الفرشه لتحت نضغطها.
بس ضلك مغمض عينيك.
قديش عمرك يا كريم؟ 5 سنين. حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل على هيك محتل.
يا نوح في سيخ يا في سيخ. اطلع قولوا يا الله.
توكل على الله. توكل على الله.
اطلع
توكل على الله.
هذا على سلامتك كريم. يلا نخلف مكان بسرعه.
بالراحه.
ايوه ريح بالراحه. هيا بابا. الحمد لله سلامتك يا كريم. خلاص في غيره؟ في غيره يا ابو نبيل؟
The children were placed in their father's hands. Anas al-Sharif says that the 5-year-old Karim was trapped for hours under the rubble with his baby brother and their mother, but all were pulled out alive. For 3 months, Israel has sealed the crossings, preventing international aid agencies from delivering food, water, medicine, fuel, infrastructure, repair parts, and other basic essentials, engineering a full-blown catastrophe of starvation. Last week, Israel and its U.S. partners opened its 4 so-called aid distribution centers as part of the private, shadowy Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, branding it as an effort to distribute aid to 2 million starving Palestinians. Since May 27th, when the private firm began its lethal and humiliating operations, more than 100 Palestinians have been killed and nearly 500 injured while seeking meager portions of food aid. The Gaza government media office said on Tuesday, June 3rd, that the Israeli occupation is turning these aid distribution centers, quote, into mass death traps and bloodbaths. That day, at least 27 Palestinians were shot and killed, and more than 90 were wounded. Two brothers, 15-year-old Ahmed Mohammed Zaidan and 17-year-old Abdulrahman Zaidan, witnessed the murder of their mother, Reem, while they were trying to get an aid parcel on Tuesday. Abdulrahman said that he was next to his mother when she was shot in the head by Israeli sniper fire on the crowd. Quote, "We don't know which way to run. We didn't know which way to run. Bombing and the occupation closing in. They said, get behind the wall. We went behind the wall," he said. When they thought it was okay to keep moving, Abdulrahman says that, quote, "My mom told me to duck and walk forward. We walked, ducking our heads, when suddenly she started saying, 'Take care of your brother.' The sniper had shot her in the head." 15-year-old Ahmed said that, quote, "We didn't know what was happening. We're just children, civilian children. There were no fighters among us. No one from our side attacked the Zionists. Yet the Zionists started bombing us everywhere. Don't go to the aid centers. You'll lose your siblings. Don't go," he pleaded. "For a coupon that's not even worth 50 shekels, it's not worth it to sacrifice our lives." The day before, on Monday, June 2nd, at least 3 Palestinians were killed and 35 wounded near the so-called aid distribution point in Rafah. And on Sunday, June 1st, Israel carried out massacres at 2 aid points in Rafah and at the Netzarim corridor south of Gaza City. Witnesses say that in Rafah, around 3:30 a.m., as people waited in line for the aid point to open at 6 a.m., Israeli forces and drones fired directly into the crowd, sparking chaos and mass casualties. At least 30 were killed on the spot. Doctors Without Borders was part of the mass casualty response at Nasser Medical Complex in Khan Yunis. Patients told the medical group that, quote, "They were shot from all sides by drones, helicopters, boats, tanks, and Israeli soldiers on the ground." Noor Al-Saka, a communications officer with Doctors Without Borders, stated, quote, "The hospital corridors were filled with patients, but unlike what I have witnessed before, where most of the patients were women and children, today it was mainly men. They lay in their beds in the hallways because the rooms are already packed with injured people. They had visible gunshot wounds in their limbs, and their clothes were soaked with blood. They looked shattered and distraught after trying to secure food for their children, returning instead injured and empty-handed. Outside, there was shouting, sirens, a constant rush of new arrivals to the emergency room. Amid the chaos, we received confirmation that a colleague's brother had been killed while attempting to collect aid from the distribution center," she added. Mansour Sami Abdi, a father of 4, described the chaos to Doctors Without Borders, saying, quote, "People fought over 5 pallets. They told us to take food. Then they fired from every direction. I ran 200 meters before realizing I'd been shot. This isn't aid. It's a lie. Are we supposed to go get food for our kids and die?" Inside Nasser Medical Complex, Dr. Ahmed Abu Suaid reported on the mass casualties following the June 1st massacres.
Today we had a mass casualty event, hundreds of injured, already dozens if not hundreds of confirmed casualties, deaths. The hospital is overwhelmed already. We're running out of ketamine, we're running out of dressings, we're running out of chest tubes. And the doctors, we've only been doing this for a few days. Doctors here have been doing this for the last 200 days, pardon me. They're exhausted, the resources are overwhelmed. These are all civilian casualties that were asked to go to an aid center to collect food and ended up presenting with gunshot wounds, shrapnel wounds. Most of them are critical. Some of them arrived dead on arrival because of severe targeted gunshot wounds to the head and the thorax. I've never seen anything like this, and I don't know what more there is to say. I just want to say these are civilians that were looking for food and they've been shot, and there's a lack of aid, there's a lack of food, there's a lack of supplies. Wherever you sit on the political spectrum, this is wrong. This is a humanitarian issue. This is not a political issue. These people need care, they deserve food, and they deserve aid. And that's my message to the world, Western world, Arab world, whatever the world is. If this situation can't continue, there's people dying that can't be saved. There's women, children, adults, all portions of the population are dying and they can't be saved. This is all preventable if aid was allowed in.
That was Dr. Ahmed Abu Swaid inside Nasser Medical Complex on Sunday, June 1st. Instagram user Rami Nassar documented his journey under fire at one of the aid points the day before, on Saturday, May 31st. He stated, quote, "On Saturday, I went to the aid distribution point with my little brother. We didn't want to go, but we didn't have a choice. It was either that or starve. I didn't want to bring Mohammed with me. He's only 14, but he didn't want to be left alone. After the airstrike last year, it's just the two of us left. We lost our entire family, our parents, our siblings, everyone. Since then, it's been just me trying to keep him safe. I'm all he has. I have to make sure he eats, make sure he's okay. Right now, we're surviving on one meal a day. We have to ration everything. What we saw yesterday, I can't describe it. The sound of the bullets above our heads was like a sword slicing through the air. You hear the whistle and your whole body freezes. Everyone around us was bleeding, some injured, some already gone. We ran when the shells started falling. I couldn't even film that part. This video is only a small piece of what happened. I hope it reaches people who can help. We never want to go back to a place like that again." Here's Rami's clip from Saturday.
يلا يلا قوم تعالوا ول يلا حمود يلا روح.
That was Instagram user Rami Nassar reporting from one of the aid distribution points last weekend. The Gaza government media office stated on Saturday that, quote, "We affirm to the entire world that what is happening is the systematic and malicious use of aid as a tool of war, employed to blackmail starving civilians and forcibly gather them in exposed killing points, managed and monitored by the occupation army and funded and politically covered by the occupation and the U.S. administration, which bears full moral and legal responsibility for these crimes. It has been proven by blood, eyewitness testimony, and field and international reports that the Aid Through Buffer Zones project is a failed and dangerous project," the media office said, adding that, quote, "It serves as a cover for the occupation's security and military policies and is used to falsely promote claims of a humanitarian response, while the occupation closes official crossings and prevents the arrival of genuine relief from neutral international bodies." After more than 100 people were killed in the 8 days since it began its operations, the private U.S.-led mercenary firm announced that they were suspending operations for the day on Wednesday, June 4th. The Palestinian Center for Human Rights, meanwhile, called for the total and immediate dissolution of this shadowy firm. The Israeli army's, quote, "insistence on maintaining this deadly aid distribution mechanism, despite the chaos it has inflicted and the consistent pattern of daily casualties and injuries, clearly indicates that the Israeli occupation forces do not intend to provide aid to Gaza's starving population," the Human Rights Center stated. Rather, they aim to turn this mechanism into traps of death, humiliation, and dehumanization of Palestinian civilians who have endured months of unprecedented levels of deliberate starvation. After the American CEO of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation resigned before the aid points even began its chaotic, incompetent, and lethal operations, a new CEO was appointed this week. Johnny Moore, a Christian Zionist evangelical leader with close ties to both U.S. President Donald Trump and Israeli Prime Minister and war crimes suspect Benjamin Netanyahu. Tel Aviv newspaper Haaretz reports that Moore is the president of the Congress of Christian Leaders and holds ties with key Gulf political figures, having held meetings with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman during a first-of-its-kind visit to Saudi Arabia by evangelical leaders during Trump's first term. Moore has denied that Israel attacked and killed Palestinians seeking aid in the past week. Israel attacked hospitals again this week across Gaza as the health sector continues to be in a free-fall catastrophe after more than 600 days of genocide and 3 months of total blockade. Noted Palestinian-British surgeon Dr. Ghassan Abu Sitta said that the level of the crisis is so intense that the blood bank in Gaza is now unable to accept blood donations, even as the need for blood is critical. Quote, the donors are too malnourished from the famine, too dehydrated from the diarrhea diseases they got from drinking dirty water, and many have hepatitis viral infections, he stated on June 3rd. The Palestinian Health Ministry in Gaza announced that operating rooms, intensive care units, and emergency rooms are experiencing a shortage of life-saving medications, medical supplies, and diagnostic imaging equipment that are preventing urgent surgical interventions for wounded patients. On Wednesday, June 4th, Israel drone-bombed the roof of the main building of the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital in Deir Balah in central Gaza, marking the 11th time the hospital has been attacked since October 2023. On June 1st, Israeli forces bombed the Noura al-Kabi dialysis center in northern Gaza, the only clinic serving kidney patients in the besieged north. The Ministry of Health said that the destruction of the clinic, quote, poses a catastrophic threat to the health of those in need of dialysis, the consequences of which are unpredictable, they said. 41% of kidney failure patients have died during the last 20 months because they have been denied access to dialysis centers along with the destruction of designated clinics and nephrology departments, the ministry added. On May 29th, Al-Auda Hospital in Jabalia was emptied of its patients and staff following a 2-week siege on the medical facility by Israeli forces. Along with the forced closure of the Indonesian hospital earlier this week, not a single hospital remains open or functioning in northern Gaza, the UN reports. And just this morning, on June 5th, Israel attacked the Al-Ahli Arab Hospital in Gaza City, killing at least 3 journalists while they were setting up shelters to protect themselves from the heat, according to Al Jazeera's Hani Mahmoud. He said that this is the 8th time the hospital has been hit by Israeli forces since October 2023. It was reopened just 2 weeks ago after the last attack, according to Dr. Fadel Naim, who works at the hospital. Hani Mahmoud said, quote, 3 of the journalists were reported killed on the spot and pieces of flesh were left scattered on what was once a manicured garden at the medical facility. 1 more journalist was reported with serious injuries and is now undergoing surgery inside the hospital with minimal supplies. There are other serious injuries due to the shrapnel. These drone missiles are lethal because they are packed with nails and pieces of metal. When they explode, they pierce through the body and cause severe bleeding, he said. Amidst the massacres, the Israeli army is continuing to shrink the areas in which Palestinians live in Gaza. The United Nations Humanitarian Office stated on Wednesday that the latest figures indicate that in just the past 3 weeks, more than 100,000 people have been forced to flee in North Gaza and the Gaza City area alone. The UN says that while more than 640,000 people have been displaced again in the past 3 months since Israel broke the ceasefire, the Israeli authorities have not allowed the entry of any shelter supplies. An update on a story we reported last week on the al-Najjar family, whose home was attacked by an Israeli airstrike on May 24th in Khan Yunis. As you'll remember, Dr. Ala al-Najjar, a pediatric specialist, was working at the Nasser Medical Complex when her home nearby was bombed, incinerating and killing 9 of her 10 children. Her son, 11-year-old Adam, survived, but was critically injured and remains in the ICU. Her husband, physician Hamdi al-Najjar, also survived the bombing, but he too died from his injuries on Saturday, May 31st. Ala and her son Adam are now the only survivors of their 12-person family left. We've published many features on the Electronic Intifada in the last week, but we wanted to highlight excerpts of Medical Neglect Widespread in Israeli Prisons by 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜, writing from Gaza. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 writes that Palestinian detainees in Israeli prisons face not only intolerably abusive conditions, but also systematic medical neglect, worsening their physical and mental health. She profiles 3 Palestinians from the occupied West Bank and Gaza who described harrowing experiences that reflect a pattern of deliberate denial of basic health care, a situation that has worsened since October 2023. Quote, Adel Sobieh, 21, was detained from a hospital bed on March 20th, 2024. At the time, he was a patient at Al-Shifa Hospital, where he was receiving treatment for a leg wound sustained in the so-called Flower Massacre in February 2024. But on March 18th, 2024, Israeli troops surrounded the hospital and began systematically rounding up patients and staff. Soldiers forced everyone, including patients, into the hospital yard, Adel told the Electronic Intifada. They made us strip and walk toward them. I was slow because of my injury, but they didn't care. They beat my injured leg until it started bleeding. The abuse didn't stop there. I was loaded onto a military truck where soldiers, he said, extinguished cigarettes on my body. By the time Adel reached the Sdei Teiman detention camp, he had lost consciousness from the torture. At the Sdei Teiman clinic, a doctor slapped me and muttered something in Hebrew. Adel's wounds were treated, and he was told he would be taken to hospital. When I woke up at the hospital, a doctor told me they were going to amputate my leg. I signed a form under pressure that I agreed to the surgery and waived the right to a blood transfusion. After the operation, which saw him lose his leg to above the thigh, they mocked him. They said, "We took your leg," and laughed. That same day, they transferred me back to Sdei Teiman. Adel spent 2.5 months in detention, during which he endured repeated beatings and remained cold throughout, as he was often kept naked except for a diaper. Quote, I lived 44 days in hell. Those are excerpts from Medical Neglect Widespread in Israeli Prisons by 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜, writing from Gaza on electronicintifada.net. And finally, as we always do, we wanted to highlight people expressing joy, determination, and resilience across Palestine and today around the world. A small group of international volunteers are right now aiming to break the siege on Gaza. For the last few days, the Madeleine, a small boat, is sailing from Italy across the Mediterranean Sea and is due to reach Palestine's coast in the next few days. The crew is carrying with them aid for Palestinians in Gaza. Baby formula, flour, rice, diapers, women's sanitary products, water desalination kits, medical supplies, crutches, and children's prosthetics. Aboard the Madeleine is the young climate activist Greta Thunberg, who has been a vocal and steadfast supporter of the Palestinian liberation struggle and an activist against Israel's genocide. On June 3rd, as the boat sailed in international waters near Greece, drones hovered over the activists' heads. They were revealed to be herons, Israeli-made surveillance drones developed by Israel Aerospace Industries and sold to Greece under a partnership with Israel that activists say allows for potential backdoor access by the Israeli military. However, as of this morning, the boat is still sailing. 22-year-old Greta Thunberg spoke recently to Middle East Eye, explaining why climate activism is interlinked with solidarity with Palestine.
Ask you, and I've seen a lot of people level this accusation at you. You came to the fore as a climate activist. Why are you so concerned with the Palestinian cause?
Well, shouldn't the question be, why should we not be concerned? Why should we not be absolutely outraged and heartbroken every single time we think about it? I don't understand how we cannot be. And it's so weird to me that people are separating caring about the environment and the climate to caring about humans. Like, I care about the environment and the climate because I care about human and planetary well-being. Those are the same thing in my view. We are standing up for justice and for sustainability, for liberation for everyone. There can be no climate justice without social justice. We cannot pretend to care about the future of humankind, and how our children will be affected in the future. Like, for example, in the case of Sweden, like, we cannot pretend to care about how our white privileged children will be impacted of climate change in the future, when we are ignoring the suffering of marginalized people today. That is just an extremely racist way of seeing the world.
And I know that there's going to be people in Gaza that have read about your journey and will be waiting for you on the shores of Gaza in the next couple of days. What's your message to them?
My message to them is so much that they are the real heroes of today, that the courage they have to just simply defend themselves and be able to exist every single day in this genocide is something that no one else will ever be able to understand. And that also, on behalf of the international community, the so-called Western world, I am so sorry that we have betrayed you by not supporting you enough.
That's Greta Thunberg aboard the Madeleine ship speaking to Middle East Eye. The ship is headed to Gaza and will continue to follow the flotilla's progress in the coming days. That's it for the news roundup. As always, go to electronicintifada.net for much more, especially to read our new features by our brave writers in Gaza. You're watching the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleague Ali Abunimah. Hi, Ali.
Hi, Nora. Thank you for that always heartbreaking report, but so important to bring that information together. And I know that I speak on behalf of so many people watching when I say thank you for doing that. And just one update about the Madeleine, the ship that Greta Thunberg is on. Just 2 hours ago, the Gaza Freedom Flotilla posted a statement that the ship actually rescued 4 refugees at sea, and those were people apparently who were on a sinking boat overloaded with dozens of people who had fled from Libya or who had left from Libya. So it's extraordinary that there is the Mediterranean is always marketed to us as this place of beauty and leisure and vacations, and yet the reality is it is a site of a lot of pain and suffering, and even on the way to try to break the siege of Gaza, that can't be avoided.
Yeah, and it really just kind of shows the general mission of a flotilla like this. It is a humanitarian mission. It is a humanitarian intervention to save lives in the Mediterranean, in Gaza, places, sites of extreme colonial violence and imperial power. I mean, Libya. It's not lost on me the irony of people trying to seek safety from the current situation in Libya, a place that has been destroyed by Hillary Clinton and the Obama administration and successive U.S. administrations since. And that's where, Israel is, trying to expel Gaza's population. The whole thing is just, it's horrific. And yet there's this, this one beacon of light, literally sailing through the Mediterranean, aiming to break the siege, aiming to confront, the occupiers and Western power. So it's always scary. I mean, we know what happened to previous flotillas in the last 15 years, especially. We remember what happened with the Mavi Marmara, a Turkish flotilla in 2010, almost exactly 15 years ago, and the massacre that happened aboard that boat by Israeli commandos, and the flotillas in the recent years, which have been commandeered by Israeli naval forces. But we're going to see what happens with this one.
Yeah, and just one footnote that there is an Israeli connection to the tragedy of migrants and asylum seekers trying to
Yeah.
cross the Mediterranean, often fleeing the chaos sown by Western instigated wars. That the EU's, as our colleague David Cronin has reported over many years, the EU's Frontex border agency uses Israeli-built Heron drones to monitor and surveil migrants and refugees in the Mediterranean.
Yeah. Yeah. And those were the same drones that the activists spotted above them just a day or two ago. It's all very connected. And as I said, we'll keep watching. But we have a lot coming up. We have Jon's report on the resistance in Gaza and by Yemeni armed forces in a little bit. But first, we pre-recorded an interview with Craig Mokhiber, an international law expert and former UN official. Let's go to that interview that we recorded yesterday.
You're watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Ali Abu Ni'mah here with my colleague Nora Barrows-Friedman. Last week, Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia and Herzegovina, hosted the opening public session of the Gaza Tribunal. It's a people's tribunal formed by a coalition of international legal scholars, human rights experts, and others to investigate Israel's genocide and war crimes in Gaza. Holding the opening session in Bosnia, itself the site of genocide in the early 1990s, has powerful resonance. Let's take a look at this video of Penny Green, Professor of Law at Queen Mary University of London, launching the Sarajevo Declaration of the Gaza Tribunal on May 29th.
In the Declaration of Sarajevo, the Gaza Tribunal declares our collective moral outrage at the continuing genocide in Palestine, our solidarity with the people of Palestine, our commitment to working with partners across global civil society to end the genocide and to ensure accountability for perpetrators and enablers, redress for victims and survivors, the building of a more just international order and a free Palestine. In the declaration, we call out and condemn the myriad crimes of the Israeli regime. We demand an immediate end to those crimes, including the occupation, the siege, the apartheid, and the genocide, and freedom for Palestinian prisoners. We defend UNRWA and other humanitarian actors on the ground and demand accountability for the attacks on them. We call on all governments and on regional and international organizations to act, and we denounce those who have been complicit, from states to media corporations and others. In the declaration, we denounce the wave of persecution and crackdowns on human rights defenders, peace activists, students, academics, workers, professionals. And we honor those who stand up, who, despite this persecution, have had the courage and moral convictions to stand up and speak out.
Penny Green is a member of the steering committee of the Gaza Tribunal, along with our next guest, Craig Mokhiber. Craig, as our regular viewers will know, is a human rights lawyer with more than 3 decades of experience. He served as the director of the New York office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights until he resigned in October 2023 over the world body's inaction in the face of Israel's genocide. We're delighted to have him join us again now to talk about the Gaza Tribunal and what role it can play in the effort to hold Israel accountable for its genocide in Gaza. Welcome back to the Electronic Intifada live stream, Craig.
Thank you. Hi, Ali and Nora. Nice to be back.
It's really good to have you back on.
Thanks so much, Craig. Before we focus specifically on the Gaza Tribunal, I want to briefly get your assessment of where things stand more generally in terms of international legal and political efforts to stop the horror Israel is openly perpetrating in Gaza. We've seen a sharp uptick in criticism of Israel's actions, even by some of its staunchest allies. In mid-May, for example, France, the UK, and Canada threatened Israel with unspecified concrete actions if it doesn't end its starvation siege of Gaza. And just last week, Ireland became the first Western country and member of the EU to declare at the highest level of its government that Israel is perpetrating genocide. The EU is also reportedly reviewing its association agreement with Israel. And yet, none of these states has gone much beyond words of condemnation at this point. Do you think this is about to change, or is it just more of the same, an effort to placate public outrage that is not going away?
I think in some sense, Ali, it's all of the above. I mean, there's no doubt that all we've seen so far are threats and rhetorical measures to do something somewhere down the road if something doesn't change. And we are 600 days into a live stream genocide. That is just not good enough. Some of the states that have been a little bit tougher in their rhetoric in the last couple of weeks are states that have been directly complicit in the genocide. They have a lot of accountability lined up for them beyond these kinds of acknowledgments. There is an effort among a lot of member states in preparation for the upcoming June conference on Palestine coming up in the United Nations to try to contain the fallout from Israel's crimes in such a way that preserves the two-state solution, shifts attention to humanitarian aid only, a promise of a two-state solution, recognition of the state of Palestine, these sorts of things. And then in the meantime, some European states and others saying, well, if you don't stop, we may in some way complicate trade relations and so on. No hard measures have been implemented yet. That said, these statements would not be happening if it weren't for the global uprising against the genocide in Palestine and Western complicity in the genocide in Palestine. They've begun to feel the heat, more than a year and a half into this genocide. And that's a good sign. It means that we need to keep up the pressure. It means that there are, however slight, cracks in the institutional resistance to accountability for Israel and protection for the Palestinian people. So it is a very good signal, but it is tiny. It's far too little, too late, and we need to keep pushing to turn it into something more meaningful. In fact, people talk about a failure of international law. I don't think we've seen a failure of international law because the law has repeatedly come down on the side of Palestine in this situation. It has repeatedly come down in favor of accountability for Israeli perpetrators, redress for Palestinian victims, Palestinian freedom overall. What has failed is enforcement. What has failed is action by international institutions and states to actually give teeth to the pronouncements that are made with regard to Israeli violations, genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, gross violations of human rights. Some of that is by design in the international system. Some of that is because of abdication by prominent actors within the international system. The Secretary General of the United Nations, who continues to seek refuge behind language of two sides and conflict resolution and humanitarian aid and a two-state solution, never calling out the genocide, never demanding accountability for Israeli perpetrators, never daring to address root causes like Zionism and settler colonialism and ethnic supremacism and so on. And the same, with High Commissioner for Human Rights, the same with the so-called Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide, the same with senior political leaders across the international system, not to mention the direct complicity of the European Union as we're looking at these. And obviously the complete abdication of Arab governments around the region from their responsibility to step up and defend the Palestinians from genocide. So I think, like all global movements in the past, the pressure has to be for enforcement. Right now, all of the enforcement action is in the hands of people through boycott, divestment, sanction, all of those sorts of things, legal initiatives being undertaken for prosecutions and civil accountability for perpetrators, disruption, civil disobedience, protest, all of those sorts of things are in our hands to press for enforcement, as was the case in the civil rights movement in the United States, in the anti-Vietnam aggression movement in the West, in the anti-apartheid movement for South Africa in the West. These were all cases in history that demonstrated to us how essential it is for people to exercise moral leadership when governments and institutions refuse to do so or are directly complicit. So it's a failure of enforcement, not so much a failure of law, and we need to be focused on that. And while we take our wins in some rhetoric that is changing amongst Europeans and others, we have to press for much more, I think.
And just if I may, just as a follow-up, do you have any sense of any movement in the case at the International Court of Justice, South Africa's genocide case? And also there was some news in recent days relating to the International Criminal Court. The chief prosecutor, 𝐄𝐥𝐿 𝐈𝐧𝐭𝐫𝐿, has gone on leave because of some allegations about potential workplace harassment that he's accused of. And there was a report in the Wall Street Journal that said that he was about to issue indictments for Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, these two ultra-far-right Israeli ministers. But he couldn't do that, couldn't get them out before he had to go on leave. And according to the Wall Street Journal, it is unlikely that his deputies will do so in his absence. What do you make of all this?
Well, there's a multi-layered campaign of obstruction of justice being carried out at all levels in the dark rooms of The Hague from Israeli spy agencies and US spy agencies, offering threats and inducements to judges and people in the prosecution and so on. There is a direct full frontal assault by the government of the United States against the court, imposing sanctions on the prosecutor's office, threatening sanctions against judges, threatening not just the court and the prosecution, but anyone who does business with them, whether they're non-governmental organizations or lawyers or internet providers. The ICC's case against these Israeli genocidaires has essentially ground to a halt, that they are unable to function in any meaningful way because, Microsoft shut down their email, for example. All essential non-governmental actors who are involved in the justice process, many of them have had to pull out for fear of arrest or punishment. Bank accounts have been frozen to prevent them from doing anything, paying staff or financing investigation and so on. And then on top of all of this, you have a smear campaign conducted by Israel proxy groups in the West to discredit the court and individual actors there. And while all of these things are going on, we suddenly are notified that the chief prosecutor who brought the indictments in the first place is stepping aside under a cloud of accusations of harassment. I don't think it's a coincidence by any means. He was the one who belatedly, but I think assertively, brought the cases and was carrying on and was about to release more indictments for more senior Israeli perpetrators, and suddenly he gets shoved aside in these circumstances. So, I think the last time we spoke, I said, and I'll say it again, the pressure on the ICC, the ICJ, the UN, other official institutions to do the wrong thing is enormous and unprecedented. And they are using everything they can use, threats and bribery and sanctions and smears and all these sort of things to prevent these judicial officers from doing the right thing. The most important thing that can happen with these mechanisms now is to make sure that the pressure they're getting from the public to do the right thing, to not allow justice to be obstructed, to not delay the case, to not hold back on indictments and prosecutions, that pressure has to be greater than the pressure that's coming from these rogue actors in the US government and in the Israeli government and their intelligence agencies. So I always encourage people, keep this on the agenda, keep the pressure on. The International Court of Justice has been proceeding apace. That pace is a slow pace, always. So by the time they complete the genocide case in the International Court of Justice, we're likely to be a couple of years away, and that's too late to save anybody. I do believe that unless there are significant obstruction threats and so on there that actually succeed, that there is just on the law and the facts alone, it is it is guaranteed effectively that the International Court of Justice will come down with a finding of genocide and with findings for accountability of perpetrators of the Israeli state, and that all of these things feed each other, right? I mean, Israel is on trial for genocide in the World Court. I'll say it again. Its leaders are the subject to arrest warrants for crimes against humanity in the International Criminal Court. There are individual legal proceedings underway in third states all around the world brought by activists and legal mechanisms and so on. There is a mountain of evidence that's been collected by independent UN human rights mechanisms and major non-governmental organizations. The accountability, the visibility of accountability is so much greater than it was just a few years ago. But enforcement is going to depend on insistence from all of us. So those processes continue. They are running into serious difficulties, as we knew that they would. But I think it's up to all of us to keep them on the rail.
Craig, I had a question before we talk about the Gaza Tribunal. I wanted to kind of just get your analysis and reaction to, 90 days of forced starvation, total siege, and now we have this, U.S., this private mercenary corporation, the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. People in Gaza are calling it the Gaza Humiliation Foundation, where nearly every day this week that it's been opened, Israeli and possibly U.S. forces have opened fire on starving Palestinians trying to access, really what's, the kind of one box of snacks that you could get at a corner store. Nothing to address the just enormous, incalculable need of people after 90 days of starvation. The United Nations and its partners have been saying, since March 2nd, when the crossings closed when Israel closed the crossings, that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of trucks waiting to enter, and that they must be let in. But, those are statements. Those are, those are words. And people have been saying that, Palestinians can't eat words. They can't eat, statements like this. What are the physical, material machinations that could be taken by the UN and its partners with their trucks at the crossings? What would it take to actually force Israel to open these crossings and not just have this, private mercenary corporation being able to call the shots, literally and figuratively right now?
Well, this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, so-called, is the most cynical ruse that anybody has ever seen. Perfidious, absolutely. This is a hodgepodge of Israeli and U.S. intelligence operatives, sketchy finance firms in the U.S., mercenaries and private military contractors posing as humanitarians, but actually set up as a part of the Israeli regime's strategy for occupation and the final phase of the genocide in Gaza. The most frustrating thing was to hear media reports referring to this as an aid scheme or as a humanitarian alternative and so on. It was not conceived as such. It was not set up as such. It has not functioned as such. And at least that ruse is beginning to fall apart, that there is widespread recognition now that this is anything but a humanitarian scheme, and that it's not being done to relieve the suffering in Gaza or to feed the Palestinian people. It was set up as first a fig leaf to tamp down on Western public pressure on the Israeli regime, kind of a smokescreen for its genocide, because some people were complaining about the starvation. It was set up as a vehicle to get the UN, especially UNRWA, out of the way of the regime's genocide, because the UN is the main lifeline of the people in Gaza in these circumstances. So they need to shove them aside with this fake mechanism. And it is set up specifically as a tool to drive genocide supporters southward into a handful of, let's call them, concentration camps, clearing the north of Gaza, concentrating survivors, in essence, for easy departure or death. And in place of perfectly efficient and effective UN aid distribution networks that had, long-standing relationships with the communities, perfectly able to deliver food from pickup points to the people who need it, thousands of trucks waiting outside the checkpoints. In place of this functioning thing, they created a lie that has been denied by everybody, including US personnel in the know, that somehow Hamas was interfering with the aid and therefore we couldn't rely on these mechanisms. That was a lie. They created this fake humanitarian organization. They blocked all humanitarian aid from the UN and other humanitarian organizations. They shut down UN operations, those that they hadn't already destroyed. And they set up these 4 distribution points, 3 of them near the Egyptian border in Rafah, 1 near the Netzarim occupation corridor just south of Gaza City. Then they told starving Palestinians to walk for hours, to risk their life on the way, to stand in cages under the hot Gaza sun for hours. Some of them are abducted by Israeli occupation forces before they even get to the cages. And for many Palestinians, if they're abducted, that means repeated beatings and torture and sexual assault and disappearance or death. Many who manage to get to the lines are turned away from those lines. Many, of course, are too weak, too sick, too disabled, too old, too pregnant, too busy caring for children to even attempt to get to those distribution points. And we've seen some who dare to risk it can be shot down by Israeli quadcopters and tanks and snipers. More than 100 people have already been killed at these GHF aid traps, and hundreds more have been wounded, and many that we don't know how many have been abducted by the Israel occupation forces. And then even, Nora, if you succeed, what you get is a meager package of food, well below nutritional requirements, and mostly dry goods with no clean water or fuel with which to prepare it. And in the meantime, Israel systematically destroying homes and tents and refugee shelters to prevent you from returning home so you have no place to go. That is not an aid plan. That is a cruel component of the genocide in Palestine. It is wholly, and it's not just Israel, it's the United States. This is a joint genocidal effort by those two governments. And so looking for the US to play any role that would relate to enforcement is impossible. Right now, as we speak, there is a Security Council ceasefire attempt, the 5th, since this wave of genocide began, and the US is poised to veto it. As far as when we started here, it hadn't happened yet, but the US is poised to veto this E10 resolution that would call for an immediate and permanent ceasefire. So it's not going to come from that direction. And that's why these official institutions like the Security Council, which is completely blocked by the US from taking any meaningful action, not just for a ceasefire, but let's say a protection force, a military intervention, an accountability mechanism, all of those, even removing Israel, the murderer of UN staff still has UN credentials and voting rights. So having them still present, the Security Council nor the GA has done the job that they need to do. And then in the meantime, we see this week that the General Assembly of the United Nations elected Annalena Baerbock of Germany, who rose to prominence in her vociferous defense of the genocide against the Palestinian people, and including the targeting of children and families and so on. And she has just been elected as the next president of the General Assembly, put forward by Germany, endorsed by the entire Western Europe and other group, and not obstructed by the majority of governments around the world that just accept these rotations of posts through the various regional groups. And that means that this person complicit in genocide, and enthusiastically so, will be presiding over the General Assembly during the genocide, during efforts to follow up on the previous resolution of the General Assembly to hold Israel accountable, during the UN Conference on Palestine coming up in June. It is an absolute scandal that this has happened. So I will just repeat it again. Moral leadership will not come from these institutions, official institutions. It will come from us, come from people and movements, or not at all.
Well, thanks for that, Craig. And let's get into the nuts and bolts of what the Gaza Tribunal is. Is it an official body, and why is it needed? What's it going to do? What is the efficacy of this body, and how are Palestinians involved?
Well, in fact, a lot of prominent Palestinians are actually members of the tribunal. It is a tribunal that recognizes Palestinian leadership, Palestinian agency, Palestinian self-determination, and it is a tribunal that is working in solidarity with the Palestinian people, both those who are members of the tribunal and those in Palestinian civil society with which the tribunal collaborates. I mean, your viewers will be familiar with the original Russell Tribunal 60 years ago, as the world was watching U.S. brutality being perpetrated on the people of Vietnam, aggression, serial atrocities, and that it was doing so with absolute impunity. That's when Bertrand Russell, this prominent British philosopher, public intellectual, first launched the People's Tribunal as an organized expression of moral outrage. And he explained what these mechanisms are about. He said, we are not judges, we are witnesses. And our task is to make humankind witness to the terrible crimes that we're seeing and to unite humanity on the side of justice. So it's not a formal legal institution in that sense, although we've got many prominent international lawyers in the tribunal, but it is much more of this global civil society action to respond to the horrors and to the impunity and to the complicity that we're seeing connected to the horrors being perpetrated in Palestine. And we just finished a week of meetings, as you said, in Sarajevo, where the Declaration of Sarajevo was adopted, setting out the principles that you heard Penny Green enumerating there in that clip. But the tribunal is also working on the building of a so-called jury of conscience to make a final pronouncement in the coming months on all of the issues before it. It is compiling an archive of evidence that will be available not just for the jury of conscience, but for other actors outside of the tribunal. It has been hearing victim testimony, witness testimony, expert testimony, doing its own analysis, linking with the broader movement for Palestine in order to advance the cause of justice that has been wholly abandoned by official institutions. So it is a kind of a tribunal, but it is a tribunal which is not constrained by the constraints that are imposed on official institutions. And that allows it to behave differently. As you will see from the language in the Declaration of Sarajevo, there's none of this political correctness or gag orders that are imposed on other kinds of institutions. It begins with this basic idea that Palestinians are human beings with human rights, and that we need to speak out loud about those things that are obstructing their rights. And you will see when you read the declaration that the language is clear and principled. The tribunal rejects the both sides approach, which doesn't apply in Palestine, because in Palestine the two sides are colonizer and colonized, occupier and occupied, oppressor and oppressed, genocidaire and victims. It rejects that approach, which is often adopted by international institutions, too afraid to describe the real issues at hand. It does not recognize the Israel exception to international law that seems to creep into national policy and sometimes into international mechanisms, but it demands that Israel be held accountable. It does not accept the gag orders that you will see other institutions use. The tribunal speaks very openly about root causes, for example, and uses the words that official institutions and states refuse to utter, like Zionism, like settler colonialism, like ethno-supremacism, like apartheid, because they are the root of the problem. And
well, Craig,
go ahead. Yeah.
Just on that, why don't we take a look? We actually have a clip, another clip of Penny Green reading part of the declaration, and I'd like you to comment on that. So why don't we take a look at that now?
We also reject the destructive ideology of Zionism as the official state ideology of the Israeli regime, of the forces that colonized Palestine and established the Israeli state on its ruins, and of pro-Israel organizations and their proxies today. Instead, the declaration insists, in the words of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights, and that there are no exceptions to this rule. The Tribunal calls in the declaration for decolonization across the land and an end to the ethno-supremacist order and the replacement of Zionism with a dispensation founded on equal human rights for Christians, Muslims, Jews, and others.
And I'll also add, Craig, that the declaration also states, and I'm quoting from it now, we recognize the right of the Palestinian people to resist foreign occupation, colonial domination, apartheid, subjugation by a racist regime, and aggression, including through the use of armed struggle in accordance with and is recognized in international law and is affirmed by the United Nations General Assembly. As you said, there are no gags on what this tribunal will say or address. Talk about, it is pretty atypical for international legal gatherings to take on these issues head on, particularly Zionism and the right to armed struggle. Talk about why the tribunal is doing this and whether you think the world is ready to hear this kind of clear language.
Well, the why is, first of all, because it's the right thing to do. It's the moral thing to do. That if you believe in universal human rights, then human rights are universal, which is to say that they apply to everyone without exception, and that includes the Palestinian people. And for too long, especially during the 30 years of the Oslo process, international law, international human rights, the rules of the game were pushed aside in favor of this disingenuous political process that said to the Palestinians, you must negotiate for your rights with your oppressor. The tribunal rejects this. It does not accept any of these gag orders. It looks at what international law says. It looks at what basic moral precepts say, and it applies them to the situation. And so when it talks about bigotry and discrimination, it says that the struggle must be against all forms of racism, bigotry, and discrimination, including the equal rejection of Islamophobia, anti-Arab and anti-Palestinian racism, anti-Semitism, as well as an acknowledgement of the horrific effects that Zionism, apartheid, and settler colonialism has had on the Palestinian people. This is just axiomatic. This is a fundamental truth. It is undeniable that Zionism has had a disastrous effect on the human rights of the Palestinian people for 100 years. And so, having done the analysis, the declaration explicitly rejects the ideology of Zionism as destructive ideology. And what it calls for is a remedy to that deeply racist, fundamentally violent approach to Israel and Palestine. It calls for decolonization across all of historic Palestine. It calls for an end to the ethno-supremacist order. It calls for explicitly for replacing Zionism with a dispensation founded on equal human rights for Christians, Muslims, Jews, and others. And it does so because it's right, but it also does so because, in every other situation addressed by international institutions where there is a conflict or a crisis, it is just accepted wisdom that the way you resolve it is to address the root causes. Only in Palestine are we told that we have to ignore the root causes and just make a deal. And unless you address those root causes, you cannot have a sustainable resolution of the conflict. Before you even get to the fundamental imperative of justice, that perpetrators of genocide, perpetrators of apartheid, perpetrators of systematic crimes against humanity are not counterparts in any solution. They are actors who need to be held accountable under the rule of law before you can move on to some sort of a sustainable resolution. These are just realities that apply across the board, but have not been applied in the situation of Palestine. And the tribunal is absolutely committed to following common sense, international law, and basic morality in the way it addresses the problem. That's why,
And one of the planned outputs of the Gaza Tribunal is an archive of evidence. What are the types of evidence that it will include, and how is it being gathered?
So one of the strengths of the tribunal is that it is very well networked with people in the movement more broadly. Another strength is that there are a lot of international lawyers on board who are plugged into the legal community internationally more broadly, that we have access to witnesses and victims, experts, and so on, all of whom are providing testimony. All of that evidence is being compiled into this archive of evidence that, as I said, will both be for the benefit of the jury of conscience that will be convened to pronounce in the way that the Russell Tribunal has pronounced and so on, but also to be made available to other actors who are pursuing accountability and justice, whether those are official institutions or institutions in movements and in civil society. Yeah, we've got some good experts working on the compiling of that archive of evidence.
And I know, some people may ask, is there a way that the general public can also submit evidence? I mean, what is, is it an insular process? What is the process, if you can tell us any details about that?
Well, it's a public process. We're not meeting in secret chambers in the way that some institutions do. And so the archive will be public. The hearings have been public. They're all posted on YouTube in succession. At Gaza Tribunal /YouTube or YouTube/Gaza Tribunal, however that works. There is a website, a public website, in which these things are also provided publicly. There's broad participation in the meetings, and the entire process going forward will also be a public process. And the names of everyone who is associated with the tribunal are listed on the website. Members of the three chambers, of the advisory committee, of the steering committee, philosophers and lawyers and activists and sociologists and historians and prominent public intellectuals and leaders in Palestinian civil society, all listed there and accessible on behalf of the tribunal.
That's fantastic. Yeah, Ali, did you want to add?
It feels like, Craig, that, I think perhaps when we spoke to you a few months ago, there was a fear I think many of us had, I think I had, that the genocide in Gaza was fading into the background. And there was a risk that it was just going to carry on and the world would move on from it. It seems like more recently that's not the case. We see the Gaza Freedom Flotilla moving towards Gaza now with very prominent people on board, with Greta Thunberg is on board, and there are legislators and members of parliament from all over Europe. The actor Liam Cunningham is participating, and many other people, just ordinary people who have set aside their daily lives to take part in this. And there's an effort to organize a march from Cairo to Gaza, which the effort itself is heroic. I know that I took part in the Gaza Freedom March in 2009, and I can tell you from firsthand experience how efficient Egyptian security is at shutting things down. But the point is that people are trying to break the siege. I don't want to speak for that effort. I'm talking about what I went through in 2009, and we're seeing protests all over the world. I was in Ireland myself 2 weeks ago, and it was just inspiring to see the protests. So there is all this energy, and yet the atrocities aren't stopping. They're not even slowing down. It just seems to be getting worse, more horrific, more brazen. So, and yet there is people around the world. We just published a piece at the Electronic Intifada about a new Pew survey that shows that Israel is viewed negatively on all over the world, on every continent, and that these numbers are just getting worse and worse from Israel's perspective. I guess my question, it is this sort of mixed picture. Things are worse than ever, and at the same time there is this global uprising of support. And so I guess my question is what words do you have for people watching? How can people stay encouraged, mobilized, inspired to keep the message going and to keep it front and center? What would you say to people who are watching?
The only way that we can save our mental health when we have a front row seat to a genocide is to be active. That the only thing that we can do is to be active. Solidarity has always been the biggest weapon that we have. I mean, all those initiatives that you mentioned, Ali, every one of them is a people's initiative. They're not being convened by governments or international institutions or groups of states or international tribunals. It is a people's march to Gaza. It is a people's freedom flotilla sailing to Gaza. It is a people's tribunal that is conducting these hearings. It is people's demonstrations that are happening on college campuses and graduation ceremonies and in the capitals of cities all around the world. And where this moral gap has been left by our governments and our institutions. Our governments are corrupted and captured. Our international institutions are cowed. The courts are on the defensive. And so it has left this tremendous moral gulf that's being filled by people in the same way that those other movements we spoke about earlier in this conversation were filled by people. Let's face it, our governments are perpetrators, and they are not coming to the rescue. And that goes for those that are directly perpetrating the genocide, like the government of the United States, and those that are complicit, like many European governments, and those that are sitting on their hands and doing nothing, like many Arab governments, although some of those are collaborating as well. So that gulf has to be filled by people. And if you see all of the creative initiatives that people are taking, the encampments were creative. The flotilla, all of these things that we're talking about, creative initiatives on filling that moral gulf, not just to make a statement to each other, but because we know from history, this is the way that you chip away at the complicity of your own institutions and states. This is the way you chip away at the impunity of the Israeli regime and other perpetrators. And while we cannot win this battle overnight, because we don't have the armies and the drones and the bombs and the money that the bad guys have in this situation, we will keep chipping away. And the more people join in and take action, if you do not belong to an organization or an organized effort, join one or start one. There are plenty out there. Get involved in these things, help to publicize it, make it morally unsustainable for our governments and our institutions and our universities and our corporations and our international organizations and our regional organizations to continue on the downward spiral in which we see them, in which we see them now. And there's no reason to be discouraged, because we are seeing light. We're living in the darkness. There's no question about it, but there are these little glimmers of light, and those glimmers of light didn't come from above. They came from people. And so keep chipping away, keep cracking into the wall of impunity, and keep fighting for a more moral vision. And, the Sarajevo Declaration is one articulation of what that moral vision should look like. But, others can formulate others. But the most important thing is join, get organized, take action, isolate the Israeli regime, boycott, divestment, sanction, identify perpetrators, look for prosecutions, support those institutions that are standing up, though they are few and far between, and speak out publicly. And this is the last thing, especially at this moment in history, where the Israeli regime, its proxies in the West, and complicit government actors in Western governments have launched the most oppressive regime of the silencing of human rights defenders that we have ever seen in the West, on behalf of this one small oppressive foreign regime called Israel, silencing their own people in the United States, in Canada, in Europe, and elsewhere. That's the time for us to speak up more loudly and more often. Their hope is that this campaign of fear will quiet us down, and then it's done. So the more downward push we feel to be silent, the more we have to push up, speak out, disrupt, protest, demonstrate, isolate the regime and just declare that we will not be silent and that we dissent to apartheid, we dissent to settler colonialism, we dissent to genocide, and we dissent to the complicity of our own governments and institutions.
That's so beautifully said, Craig. I'll add one more thing, or amplify one thing you said, which is speak out and be visible. I have to say, it provides me personally with so much comfort when I see people showing visible signs of support for Palestine, whether it's a flag in their window, whether it's a bumper sticker, whether it's something tied, a button or a badge tied to their backpack, whatever it is, it lifts my heart. And I know that it does for other Palestinians who have friends, who have family, who themselves are suffering, who themselves feel isolated in the communities they live. And it normalizes it. It gives other people the courage to speak out. So even those little things, nothing is too little. We should all do as much as we can, but nothing is too little. So thank you for that reminder, Craig. Thank you for always giving us a sense of direction and hope and deep knowledge and understanding. We will be following the activities of the Gaza Tribunal, and we hope you'll come back and talk to us about what happens next soon.
Anytime, and with pleasure. And the other thing, Ali, wear a keffiyeh, everybody. I bought a case of them. I handed them out to everyone I know. It is a very clear and visible symbol of humanity and of solidarity with the Palestinian people and of dissent to the genocide and the apartheid. And I've never seen so many keffiyehs outside of Palestine in my whole life as I'm seeing these days. So I want to endorse what Ali said. Outward symbols of solidarity are very important. And just normalize it and make it everywhere.
Make it everywhere. Thank you so much, Craig. It's always a pleasure and an honor to have you.
Always an honor to be with you. Thanks for your excellent work, as always.
He's incredible, and so clear. And I mean, the way that he is, always actively motivating us to do more and not sink into pits of despair and feel helpless, because that is the goal of Israel and the US, is to make us feel like we don't matter, like we can't make a difference.
Yeah, and I think the key takeaway from Craig is that international law is important, but that doesn't mean we can sit back and let it do the job for us. All of these institutions are filled with human beings, and they are affected and influenced, for better or worse, by what's happening around them. So it really is our job to activate and make these mechanisms effective by our constant solidarity and speaking out. I think that is the lesson here.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that. And let's bring Jon on. Hey, Jon.
Hello. It's great to hear from Craig.
Yeah.
Hi, Jon.
How are you, Ali?
Good. Good to see you.
Good to see everyone.
Another big week today, or this week. Israel is saying that they're in the process of, quote, clearing the north and the south, but they are being met with a lot of resistance. Give us a sketch of what's going to come up in the resistance report.
Yeah, well, this week's resistance report, we're going to focus on operations that were tunnel-borne operations. We can see at this point in the war how clearly and impactful the tunnel network has been to allow Palestinians to fight this long, way longer than anyone believed possible. I think that's fair to say, certainly more than the Israelis ever believed possible. And Israelis are taking casualties basically every day in their effort to expand and destroy the territory they hold in Gaza.
All right. Well, take it away.
All right, let's do it. All right, so you are watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada. I am Jon Elmer. This is the Resistance Report for day 608 of this war. I am reporting on June the 5th. As always, let's start with the map so people can get we can get our bearings here. 82% of the Gaza Strip is now a no-go zone, free fire zone, essentially. Displaced populations are in the orange there, and the purple is Israeli military control. As we know, that term has, since the beginning of the war, been a term of art, not of science for the Israelis. They always say they control territory, and the evidence has been shown over and over again that that's not true, which is why you're seeing repeated operations in the same areas. Like we are seeing operations right now in Khan Yunis, 1 year after the Israelis left Khan Yunis, saying that they had defeated the Khan Yunis brigade and that the war was over in Khan Yunis. They're now returning and they're doing the same in the north, as we will see coming up. This map is from the Office of the Coordination for Humanitarian Affairs, and this map is the Israeli military map. They showed this map at their press briefing yesterday. That shows where each individual unit is operating. So you're looking at the south there in the blue, that's Rafah. This is the battle plan at this stage. They're calling the Rafah model, which is essentially ethnically cleanse and then completely destroy. That is the Rafah model. You talked about the aid distribution points. Those are in that area. The dotted line that you see there is the Morag corridor between Khan Yunis and Rafah, which I have reported on. And one of the aid distribution sites is on that corridor. The other two are in the west in Tel Sultan, up towards the brown area of that map. The Hebrew is just describing which unit is there. In the south in Rafah, it's the Gaza division that's in charge. The 36th and 98th divisions are moving into Khan Yunis from the south and from the east, and the 98th division was in Khan Yunis last year, fighting in Khan Yunis. It's also the division that ran around in late 2024. The unit that attacked Shifa Hospital. They carried out the third invasion of the Jabalia camp, committing crimes all through that area. Now, it looks like when you look at this map, like there's 5 divisions of the Israeli military fighting, but the key to what's going on at this point, 600 days into the war, is that these divisions are not fully stocked. They are not. They don't have the troop numbers that they had at the beginning of the war. The reservists are not reporting at the rate that they did at the beginning of the war. There's exhaustion in the military, and so these divisions are partial divisions. They're a collection of brigades. And normally there would be 5 in a division, 4 or 5 in a division, and right now there's barely 1 in most. There's a series of battalions in each one, but the force strength is a fraction of what it was earlier in the war. So when they talk about these things and show a map like this that shows 5 divisions moving, it's important to note that this is part of their public part of their psychological operations. But what's interesting about this map compared to the previous map is this map actually shows what territory the Israeli military holds. And it's, again, a fraction of that 80% that the maps previously showed. They've driven out the population from these areas, but they don't control them. And the areas that they do control are, as you can see in the blue there, surrounding Gaza. Those are the buffer zones. The bite into the middle of the map there is the Netzarim corridor, which they had already raised and flattened in the previous iterations of this war. In previous battles, you can see in the north that is the same case. They're pushing in on Beit Lahia in the northwest there, but they don't control Beit Lahia. And on the other side of the map in the northeast is Beit Hanun, and they have not operated in Beit Hanun, and this map clearly shows that. So I brought you this map just as an interesting it's somewhat honest from the Israeli military that they don't actually control these areas that they've been telling in the media that they do, and driving the populations out consistently over these past few weeks with their attacks on shelters and their maps pointing to that. So if we look at this next map, you can see again, so it's a big difference between what they mark as an area that's a no-go zone versus what they actually control. So the battle in Khan Yunis has just begun, and Khan Yunis refugee camps are a big area to take, and there have significant resistance forces. There's 6 battalions in the Qassam brigades in Khan Yunis. There's 4 in Rafah that have not been defeated. And so that is the situation that we are looking at. The Israeli straightforward this week when they were talking about this area to the east of Khan Yunis, Gaza. According to Army Radio, the IDF confirmed that in the past 2 weeks, an operation to destroy the Gaza neighborhood in eastern Khan Yunis has been completed. The 605th Battalion carried it out, and the commander told his troops in a letter to his subordinates that within a few days we managed to subdue the stronghold. Gaza no longer exists. So they are cleansing and destroying the areas that they are moving into. The goal, as I described last week, is openly now not fighting the Qassam brigades, not trying to kill militants per se. It is to take territory, to expand the buffer zone and destroy everything inside that territory, which is what is the model of Rafah. And so just to set it up, the theme of this show is going to be tunnel operations. I'm going to show you how the tunnels have operated at this point, 600 days into the war. The IDF said last week that there was 900 plus kilometers of tunnels, and they even admit themselves that only 25% of that network has been impacted by Israeli military operations. But we know that that number is inflated because, according to the only people that have been in the tunnels, the Qassam brigades, 𝐄𝐥𝐿 𝐈𝐧𝐭𝐫𝐿, and the captives emerged from the tunnels when they were released and described the tunnels as a spider web. So when you see these videos of the Israeli military blowing up 600 meters of a tunnel, that's just an arm of a tunnel of the spider web. So that doesn't put the tunnel out of order, and that's why we see the resistance still able to carry out these operations even in the buffer zones after all this time. So the first tunnel operation that we're going to look at here is in Khan Yunis. We're going to focus on Khan Yunis at the beginning and move our way north. So operation slide number 5 is the multi-stage ambush that was described by Qassam as part of the Stones of David ambush. So we see here on the screen the route that the Israeli military took. You could see these 5 buildings here that are shown. 3 of them are rigged, and one of them has preset explosives in them. And you can see the commanders here using drone footage to predict the route that the Israeli military will take after the initial strike. We've seen this also throughout the war, this these multi-stage operations where the resistance is predicting. So we see here a backup camera being used. The soldiers are entering to this building that Qassam calls it a wolf's howl, where we saw in previous operations where they'll fire out to bring the Israelis into that building. Here we see fighters working with a thermobaric warhead built by Qassam, and they're going to move in and ambush the reinforcements. And you can see the level of surveillance that the tunnel provides. And so once they get those soldiers in there, they detonate this tunnel, which they have done. And here they're showing airstrikes, Israeli airstrikes on the buildings that have been targeted, which is an effort to destroy the fighters that the Israelis presume are in those buildings, but they're not. They're underground, and that last shot was a soldier running away. So a detailed operation carried out in Khan Yunis, and the tunnels are each part of it because the intelligence reconnaissance and surveillance before the operations. But as we can see on this next slide, which was the from the video, you can see here that the commanders using 𝐤𝐿 drone footage or drones captured from the Israelis to get the overhead view. They predict the route. They know the route that the Israelis military will take into the battle space, but then they're predicting here, and this is the success of the operation, is predicting which buildings the Israelis will retreat to after the initial strike. And so they pick those 3 buildings side by side that they assume the Israeli military will flee into, based on intelligence, reconnaissance, and surveillance, and then they detonate those buildings where the Israeli soldiers move to, and that is the success of the operation. This next slide was also from the video, and you can just see their tunnel access gives them the ability to be within spitting distance of this Israeli military base and be tracking all of their movements in order to execute this operation in Khan Yunis. And maybe Tamara can throw up on the ticker my Twitter account, because these are censored videos. There's more to this video that we don't show because we follow we strictly follow the YouTube community guidelines to keep this show on the air, so you can check the full operations out. But this is the core of the operation that you're seeing, and the ability of the fighters to move into this area that the Israelis believe is cleansed of humans. And there's a zero tolerance for humans in this area. It's a free fire zone. So there's no intermingling with civilians who have remained in this area. That's not what's going on. All these accusations of human shields, everyone who knows this and has been following this show throughout the war knows they're ridiculous, because there's no civilians in the areas that these battles are taking place in. And 𝐤𝐿, just by moving, becomes a target. If the Israeli military sees movement, they target that movement. A significant multi-staged ambush in Khan Yunis carried out under the banner of David's Stones, which is what 𝐤𝐿 is calling this series of operations since the war resumed. And now if we look at number 8, you can see 𝐓𝐷 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐿 in Khan Yunis. Again, these fighters have been preparing a year for this battle because they don't move around Gaza. They stay in their territorial defense. You're looking at 𝐓𝐷 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐿 here planting a pressure plate for their IED. They have a massive barrel bomb, which is filled up with unexploded Israeli bombs. They harvest those bombs, put them into a massive barrel, bury the barrel, and now here they're attaching the pressure plate to it. In this case, it's a D9 armored bulldozer by Caterpillar in Peoria, Illinois, that drives over and triggers the pressure plate. We're going to see it here from 2 different angles, but the setup of the pressure plate is such that only heavy vehicles will trigger it. No local vehicle will trigger it. It has to be an armored vehicle to press down hard enough on it, and you can see a direct hit on the D9 bulldozer. This is the second angle, the second camera of the same operations. You can see again around destroyed greenhouses, which is the area that the Israelis are working here in Khan Yunis. You can see they're not inside Khan Yunis right now. They're still out in the buffer zone. You can see the medevac here evacuating the soldier. And here in the upper left, you can see the D9 destroyed, being dragged home by a Namur troop carrier. So access and egress from this operation is from a tunnel as well. And I just wanted to point out a couple things that you might not have seen in the initial running of this video. The next slide will show you that 𝐓𝐷 𝐄𝐿 here is using a stake. You can see the iron stake in his hand here that he's using as a shovel. And if we look at the next slide, you can see he's literally blacksmithed an iron stake into a shovel. You know, the accusations that the fighters are stealing aid are so ridiculous that these fighters are building their own shovels so as to not use a shovel that could be used, say, by civil defense in rescuing, as I'm sure everybody that watches this show saw this week, rescuing babies from flattened buildings in areas that are not no-go zones. The massacres are happening in areas that are not no-go zones. The no-go zones are where the fighting takes place. The massacres against civilians take place outside of those areas. And I think everybody saw the horrific footage of the baby this week, along with Israel's hundreds of airstrikes that they carried out this week. Interestingly, they're not anymore saying how many airstrikes a day they're carrying out. They counted us each day. They told how many in their field reports, and we got reports up to 160, 150 each day, every day for a long stretch of time since March, getting them up to 3,500 airstrikes. This week, they've just said dozens and dozens. So they're starting to fudge their numbers. They're also fudging their wounded numbers, which we've seen throughout the war at times. But those are happening again, downplaying their casualties at this point, because the war is not popular in Israel, and calling up these reserves to send them into Gaza to die, to continue the genocide, is something that they want to keep information under wraps on that. So that is an operation in Khan Yunis. You can see his homemade blacksmith. They're literally blacksmithing their own shovels. So I just wanted to point that one out. The next one is a mortar operation, and there was a significant number of these mortar operations. We could show a whole bunch of these, but the mortar teams are constantly at work, and this is a 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞 operation, Islamic Jihad, but the Joint Operations Room participated in these operations all week. So we saw Saraya, we saw the Qassam brigades, but we also saw the PFLP Abu Ali Mustafa brigades carrying out artillery operations. We saw the Al-Amudi brigades from the Al-Aqsa Martyrs brigades carrying out operations. The DFLP National Resistance Brigades carried out operations, and we've seen that all throughout the war. The joint operations function as essentially an auxiliary force, and they are in charge of standoff fire, artillery, mortars, rocket artillery, and they have been part of that in Khan Yunis significantly this week. There was a number of mortar operations that measured in the dozens this week in Khan Yunis, because the Israeli military is not inside Khan Yunis yet. They're being targeted on the outskirts, and the Israeli military is moving slowly, and Netanyahu even admitted that this week. They're moving slower than at any point during the war because they're casualty averse right now. And so they are carrying out massacres, but their soldiers aren't too interested in face-to-face fighting with the resistance, who are waiting in their positions for the battle. So we will see coming up, I think, in the weeks ahead, we will see a number of resistance operations videos. Just this week alone, there was 20 operations in Khan Yunis, a number of Yasin strikes versus tanks, Yasin strikes versus troops, IEDs versus excavators and tanks, all of the things that we have come to know from the resistance. So that is in the south. This battle is in the south. We'll move now to the north. We'll take a look at map number 12. Yeah, same thing, overlapping no-go zones that don't match that IDF map about area that they control. This is not area they control. This is area that they are ethnically cleansing on the edge of, and they use that word. They use the word cleanse, and Rafah is the model of cleansing. So we know what that looks like. In the north, these operations have been focused northwest in Beit Lahia, and also in the Jabalia camp. For the fourth invasion of the Jabalia camp is just beginning. They're just inching in, and they have not touched Beit Hanun, who gave them a serious bloody nose at the end of just before the ceasefire, when the general's plan, as it was called, to cleanse all of North Gaza failed because the resistance didn't even let the Israelis carry out that operation in Beit Hanun, which is a farming village, let alone all throughout Jabalia camp, and Gaza City, where the most fighters, the most battalions are. So this is the map. We're going to look at 𝐄𝐥𝐿 operations here. Number 13 is the evac notice. Again, so they clear all this area. They call it a no-go zone. They push everyone into these smaller and smaller areas, and then the resistance moves into the red areas, and that is where the battle takes place. So the warning here that you're looking at is for the east. It is for Jabalia and Gaza City neighborhoods of 𝐄𝐥𝐿, Tufar and Duraj, and Zaytun, which are east of Gaza City. Again, we haven't seen troops pushing into those areas yet. They're moving very slowly. But we saw a sniper operation in 𝐄𝐥𝐿, number 14. Again, the snipers access via tunnel, both access and egress for this Al-Ghul sniper operation. That is also part of the Stones of David series of ambushes. We have to edit this. We have edited out the soldiers here. And of course, we're going to edit out the soldiers dropping, which they do. And the Israelis admitted a seriously wounded soldier in this operation, in this David Stones operation. We can see after this also that the excavator that was in the way saw what happened here and hightails it out of the area, which is something we see the soldiers doing. But it's interesting to see the because the Al-Ghul is an anti-material rifle. It would make an absolute mess of that excavator. So it's probably the right idea by the military, but fleeing these sniper operations are something that we've watched all throughout this war. So another operation in 𝐄𝐥𝐿 next is number 15. There was 2 television IEDs set up against this this force working. Again, we see CCTV camera footage all over these areas. The Israeli military is very quick to say that there's cameras everywhere and tunnels everywhere, which they are doing. The television IED is one of the 3 core explosive devices that 𝐓𝐡𝐞 builds. We know the Shawad, the EFP, is used against tanks. You can see soldiers that we have blurred out again in there to meet YouTube guidelines. And 𝐓𝐡𝐞 also makes the Radia, which is an area explosive. And of course, hand grenades. That was the first thing that the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 brigades built, was their own hand grenades. So they're accessing this via tunnel, and then they're watching from a third place on the screens, which keeps their you can see the soldiers blurred out there to meet YouTube guidelines. And the next slide is a real detailed operation that we're going to take a little bit to. So these are M15 American anti-tank mines that have been given to the Israelis in large numbers. We can see an operation here that is going to target an Israeli force that's stationed in this house. And this is beforehand. This is the tunnel. Soraya is showing us the tunnel. They don't often do this, but they're showing us the way that they accessed this building. And you can see the way the tunnels are used. They're buried below the ground. You don't just, they're buried. The tunnels are buried. You have to dig them out. And here they're rigging up with IEDs this house, where you can see somebody has just fled this house. And the Israeli military is using this place as a base. And so the resistance targets it, again, predicting which houses along the route. Here's, again, section that's been edited out with the soldiers, and I blurred these soldiers. But this is the detonation of that operation. And again, it's from below ground where the fighters are safe, detonating the building. This is in 𝐄𝐥𝐿 again. Soraya said that they had confirmed casualties and that they had watched the medevac on this operation in 𝐄𝐥𝐿. This operation took place last week. Every video that I'm showing you this week is the same as ever. All the videos were published in the week since you last saw me. And so this operation falls within that. You can see the setup around the building. You can see the tank and the D9 bulldozer around, probably around back, like we saw in the previous video. There's more armored vehicles that just aren't in this camera shot. And I'm going to break down each of these segments for you because the detail in this is remarkable. If we look at number 17, so you can see the way the tunnel is built in this operation. They give us the shot of it. The tunnel is key to this because they're accessing the area in an ethnically cleansed zone. If they're out on the street, they are targeted instantly and killed, which is how you know that these videos that the Israelis are publishing of drone strikes on civilians walking in the middle of the road are civilian massacres. They say they're fighters, but they're not fighters. We've never seen fighters walking down the middle of the road. And here you see it in stark reality under this tunnel. The next slide, you can see the use of the this is a return to sender operation. They're using these M15 mines that the Americans gave to the Israelis and the Israelis used to blow up the houses. They were captured by Saraya and used in this operation. And the next part of it that we clipped here is they're hiding the IED inside the pot, because at this point in the war, the Israelis are very aware of the ways the houses are booby-trapped. They send cameras in, as we've seen. They send dogs in. So these are the disguising of this operation in a pot. The next one is the way it's used in the wall, tucking it into the wall here of someone's house. In behind, they showed in the video how it was on both sides of the wall. They'll cover that up. And the real interesting note is this next one here, where the wiring, he's even put the wiring to match the house's wiring, so as to not be seen by the Israelis or the dogs or the cameras on the dogs and cameras on the drones in this operation. So significant ambush in Shujaiya. There was a number of other operations in Shujaiya this week. On Tuesday, the Israeli military reported an incident where a fighter emerged from a tunnel into an alley in Shujaiya. The alleys of Shujaiya have vexed the Israelis for generations. The fighter shot two soldiers basically from point blank range and escaped back down through the alley, back down into the tunnel, and he survived, returned to his base safely. The incident, according to the IDF, occurred in an area where the IDF had been operating for a relatively long time. Therefore, they believed that there was nobody in this area, but the tunnels allow them to access, the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 fighters to access the area that the Israelis believe they're safe in and hit them. At the time of this operation, the Israelis said there was an Air Force combat helicopter. So this unit has Apache helicopter support and still couldn't find the resistance fighter who killed at least one soldier, they're admitting to, and wounded two others. There was also an operation that the Israeli military reported on that we haven't got a field report yet from 𝐓𝐡𝐞, but we will certainly in the coming days, that the Army radio is reporting that 𝐓𝐡𝐞 used a drone-dropped explosive on a special forces unit that comprised of two Yahalom tunnel unit soldiers. These are the special forces that go down into the tunnels, and one Shin Bet officer were wounded in that. And also there was an operation in the Jabalia camp that carried out a multi-hour battle that was based around IEDs detonated along the road that the Israelis take. And three Gavati Brigade soldiers were killed in that operation, and two were seriously wounded. According to the Army investigation according to the IDF investigation cited in Army radio, this particular scene along this road had an estimated 20 explosive devices spread out along the route, and the IDF estimates that these were activated from a tunnel, and they made a big deal of it this week in their communications, talking about how these houses all have tunnels And that is the major threat to their forces and why they are moving slowly. So that is the northern Gaza Strip report. I just wanted to quickly bring people up to date with Yemen because over the past 2 weeks, there has been 19 ballistic missile attacks on Israel and 6 drone attacks with the Yafa drone. In the past 2 weeks, according to the Yemeni Armed Forces and Abdul Malik al-Houthi. And one of the statements from the missile attack by the Yemeni Armed Forces said the Yemeni Armed Forces are following the developments of the battle in Gaza and stand in reverence and respect for the sacrifices of its free and steadfast sons. They extend the military salute to the Al-Qassam brigades and Suraya al-Quds and to all the heroic mujahideen in all the factions who defend the nation when everyone else has abandoned them. May the eyes of the cowards never sleep. Free, dear, independent Yemen is with you, and we will not let you down, even when the whole world does. It is with you. Yemen is with you until the aggression against you stops and the siege is lifted. And another ballistic missile attack 2 days ago, the Yemeni Armed Forces pointed out that the missile strike prevented American military cargo planes from landing. They're landing at Navatim Air Base in the south and also presumably landing some parts at Ben Gurion Airport, but we can see in this next slide the C-17 heavy lift that was on its way to Gaza just turned tail, I guess you call that, when you do a complete 180 and head back where you came from. Instead of dropping off military parts and components and weapons to Israel, it flew back to its base. I think in this case, the base was in Italy, Ramstein in Germany. And there was multiple of these. And I reported last week, and Nora reported as well, on the 800 airlifts of heavy weapons, heavy airlift planes bringing weapons to Israel, 90,000 tons, the Ministry of Defense bragged about. So that's one of these planes. So the air blockade is working in the sense that these planes are not landing. And you can see in this next slide from Menk Osing, who put this one together, and you can see them all scrambling here in circles, not wanting to land at the air base that they're supposed to be landing in the south of Israel to unload these weapons. So a successful blockade by the Yemeni Armed Forces is part of their aerial blockade of Israel. And just as a last point, number 33, this is the Qassam brigades saluting the Yemenis for this. You can see the Jambia Yemeni dagger in through the tarmac of Ben Gurion Airport. You can see caution tape on this Qassam poster that says closed by order of Yemen, meaning the airport. You can see the control tower in the background. And this is from an Abu Obaida, the spokesperson for the Qassam brigades. He sent this message out in May. Glory to Yemen, the twin brother of Palestine. May God guide your aim, bless your struggle, and accept your sacrifices, Abu Obaida said. He said, you are from us and we are from you. So solidarity between Yemen and the resistance in Gaza that we have been tracking on the resistance report for many months now. And that is the resistance report for day 608 of this war.
Thank you so much, John. I don't know. Sometimes I'm just like, I don't even know what to say. The fact that they are using the actual term cleansing or clearing or, these kind of admitting the quiet part out loud in full view. They're saying that they're genociding.
Term that goes back, isn't it? A
Yes.
long time, like to the Nakba.
Yeah.
I remember Ilan Pape writing about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not an accidental term, and it's what they did. And in Rafah is completely destroyed. And so it is cleansed in that sense. Their other attempts to do that elsewhere have failed. And so we'll see how the resistance responds to the attempts to cleanse in the north. in particular. But in Rafah and the battle in Khan Yunis right now that is just beginning, I think will be all eyes on that battle.
Yeah. Incredible. And just the way, I mean, I think that after 600 days of this genocide and, the indigenous locally built rockets and other devices, it doesn't seem like there's a lack of supply. I mean, you're always talking about the kind of recycled or upcycled, return to sender kinds of munitions that the Palestinian resistance is still continuing to build.
And in a case like Khan Yunis, the Israelis have not been operated in Khan Yunis in more than a year. We know, and we hear them on your excellent news reports all the time about firing missiles into the hospitals in Khan Yunis, but actually fighting on the ground against the resistance and not just massacring people in hospital beds. That hasn't happened for over a year. So the entire Khan Yunis brigade has presumably been preparing for this battle for the last year. And I think that's why the Israelis move very, very slowly right now and are not actually trying to fight, because what they admitted is that they don't care about killing fighters anymore. The 𝐶assam brigades are the same size, and they acknowledge that. American intelligence acknowledges that. What they want is territory, and they want to destroy and cleanse that territory that they can hold around the buffer zones to increase pressure. It's part of the aid plan to increase pressure. And it's been a tough couple of weeks to be watching what has been a horrific 600 days. But the aid that Craig Mokhiber and that you covered in the introduction is devastating. Appalling criminal behavior that history hopefully will be a strong judge of.
Yep, exactly. And we just have to keep pushing, as Craig was saying, and we can't let up. We have a couple of things that we wanted to discuss. There was now these like very casual and convenient admissions by former Biden administration officials. We have Matt Miller, people call him Count 𝐄𝐥𝐞 𝐄𝐿, the former State Department spokesperson this week admitting that Israel has committed war crimes, something he was put there on the podium to deny over and over and over again for the first year and a half of this genocide. There's actually a clip of the Gray Zone's Liam Cosgrove confronting Miller at the State Department last October, 1 year into the genocide. So this was October 2024. Let's go to that clip. And then Ali, I want you to analyze this for us.
Question for you is, we often hear in response to these concerns that, well, Putin, Khomeini, they're war criminals, they're terrorists, as if they're too inherently evil or immoral for us to negotiate with. But meanwhile, this administration has financed a genocide in Gaza for the last year, and every day you're up there denying accountability for it. So, I mean, what gives you the right to lecture other countries on their moral?
So if you have a policy question for me, I'm happy to take it. If you want to give a speech, there are plenty of places in Washington where you can give a speech.
Yeah, but people are sick of the bullshit in here. I mean, like, it is a genocide. You are abetting it, and you are risking nuclear war in Ukraine.
So, Ali, what do you make of Matt Miller suddenly, revealing that, yes, Israel is committing war crimes when he's conveniently out of office?
Well, Nora, that clip, of course, is a throwback to the Biden administration. And I think we all got thoroughly sick of watching Matt Miller lie, deny genocide, deny war crimes, deny what everyone, including many of the journalists in that room, were seeing with their own eyes. And Miller now is out of office, and he gave an interview to Sky News on June 2nd. And I'm sure a lot of people have seen short clips of this, but I actually watched the whole thing and pulled out a few clips that I thought it's worth watching and then commenting on. So why don't we run the first clip, Tamara, and then we'll just go through them.
With Gaza, so Gaza has been such a horrific situation for so long.
I'm interested to hear you say that because, I was in so many of your briefings, and I hope you don't mind me saying this. We got the sense from you, your persona, what you were having to say as spokesman, that you didn't really care as much as some people did about what was going on. I kind of wondered at times whether you were seeing the same images that we were seeing daily. Were you?
Yeah, absolutely. We're seeing the same images. In some cases, we're seeing other images that you probably didn't see. I can tell you, just speaking for myself, but it's true about my colleagues in the government, the effect of that war was crushing. To look at what was happening to children every day in that war.
So it's just, I mean, that's an admission that they knew all along, all their lies, their gaslighting, their deflection, their blaming the victims. They knew all along. He just said it there. So just hold that thought and let's go to the next clip, and then we'll have more to say.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it will be a secret to know that the administration did debate at times whether and when to cut off weapons to Israel. You saw us in the spring of 2024 stop the shipment of 2,000-pound bombs to Israel because we did not believe they would use those in a way that was appropriate in Gaza. And it was clear to us in that period that there was a time when our publicly discussing withholding weapons from Israel, as well as the protests on college campuses in the United States, as well as the movement of some European countries to recognize the state of Palestine, all of which appropriate discussions, appropriate decisions, protests are appropriate, but all of those things together were leading the leadership of Hamas to conclude that they didn't need to agree to a ceasefire. They just needed to hold out for a little bit longer, and they could get what they always wanted, which was Israel that was forced to stand down and Israel that was isolated, and maybe a widening of the war where Hezbollah would come in and Iran would come in. So,
wow, that's an interesting take.
Yeah, another admission there that because there were protests against the genocide, we had to keep going with the genocide because we can't reward protests against genocide by stopping genocide.
Right.
And he's continuing this lie that it was Hamas that was refusing a ceasefire, the same lie that Steve Witkoff, Trump's envoy, is repeating now, and just like complete continuation of this. We spoke about that with Jeremy Scahill last week. So it just goes on and on. And so that's another admission for the record. And then let's go back on this on some hand wringing. Let's look at the next clip where we get some more hand wringing from Matthew Miller.
Now, the thing that I look back on that I will always ask questions of myself about, and I think this is true for others in government, is in that intervening period between the end of May and the middle of January, when thousands of Palestinians were killed, innocent civilians who didn't want this war, had nothing to do with it. Was there more that we could have done to pressure the Israeli government to agree to that ceasefire?
And the answer is,
I think at times there probably was. Now it's difficult. Israel was not the only what's the right word? Not the only party to this negotiation. You saw Hamas repeatedly move the goalposts, but you saw Netanyahu move the goalposts as well. And I do think there are times that we should have been tougher on him.
Yeah. So we were saying all along, and it's not, you don't have to be a genius to say it, that they could have stopped it. And now he's saying we could have done more, but of course they could have stopped it. And there's, I don't know whether to call it conscience, but there's something there that is awakened in him that he can't live with, that all those thousands of people who were killed, were killed because he and the administration he served refused to do what they could do to stop it. They had the power to stop it and chose not to. That's what he just told us right there, to translate it into plain English. And now let's look at the final clip I've picked, and then I've got a couple of comments I want to make about Matthew Miller's ultimate responsibility here.
Going on in Gaza now is a genocide?
I don't think it's a genocide, but I think I think it is without a doubt true that Israel has committed war crimes.
You wouldn't have said that at the podium.
Yeah, look, because when you're at the podium, you're not expressing your personal opinion. You're expressing the conclusions of the United States government. The United States government had not concluded that they've committed war crimes, still have not concluded that.
But your personal view is they have.
And
they were while you were there.
But let me qualify that. There are two ways to think about the commission of war crimes. One is if the state has pursued a policy to deliberately committing war crimes or is acting reckless in a way that aids and abets war crimes. And that, I think, is an open question. I think what is almost certainly not an open question is that there have been individual incidents that have been war crimes where members of the Israeli military have committed war crimes. So ultimately, in almost every major conflict, including conflicts prosecuted by democracies, you will see individual members of the militaries commit war crimes. And the way you judge a democracy is whether they hold those people accountable.
But Israel hasn't.
That's my point,
right.
Is we have not yet seen them hold sufficient numbers of the military accountable, and I think it's an open question whether they're going to.
I'm really struck that you think now that Israel did commit war crimes, and yet at the time, and I get why, but at the time you were at the podium and you couldn't say that. I mean, personally, that must be very difficult for you.
So the State Department itself had concluded, not in these, they didn't phrase it in these terms, but I think I did at the podium a few times, had concluded that it was likely that Israel had committed war crimes. But I do think it's almost certain that they have.
How difficult was it?
So, like, when there are modern day Nuremberg type trials one day for the genocide, the Holocaust in Gaza, will Matt Miller be culpable, even if he is, kind of sort of admitting that he personally feels like Israel was indeed committing war crimes? Or what's his responsibility here, Ali?
Well, before I get to that, I think that's a critical question, Nora. I just want to point out that he's still spinning here. He's still trying to minimize. He's saying, Israel undoubtedly committed war crimes, but he's also saying, but it might have just been individuals. It wasn't necessarily the policy of the government. But remember, just a few minutes ago, we heard him say that they had delayed the shipment of the 2,000-pound bombs because they didn't think Israel was going to use them appropriately in Gaza. So that's a contradiction, because that statement about the 2,000-pound bombs is an implicit admission that they knew that it was the policy of the Israeli government to commit war crimes by using 2,000-pound bombs to attack civilians. So I just want to point out that contradiction there. But what his excuse reminded me of when he says, well, it wasn't my personal opinion, I was just doing the bidding of the government, I wasn't speaking for myself, basically I was just following orders. Right. And this is called the Nuremberg defense, which runs back to the post-World War II trials of Nazi war criminals. And the Nuremberg principles, which came out of those trials, are the basis of much of international law today. The Nuremberg principles are foundational to the Rome Statute, the founding charter of the International Criminal Court, which, of course, as we spoke about with Craig Mokhiber, has issued those arrest warrants for Israeli leaders, including Benjamin Netanyahu. And one of perhaps the best known of the Nuremberg principles is Nuremberg Principle 4, which we can actually show. Tamara, I hadn't highlighted it, but if it's possible to show it, we should. In any case, I'll read it out. This is, quote, the fact that a person acted pursuant to the order of his government or of a superior does not relieve him from responsibility under international law, provided a moral choice was in fact possible to him. So the Nuremberg principle is very clear that saying I was just following orders, when you had a choice to defy those orders or to resign, means that you remain culpable if by following those orders you aided in the commission of war crimes, which Matthew Miller arguably did. And he would not be alone, because you'll remember that we've spoken in previous programs with Layla Al-Arian, the filmmaker and documentary maker from Al Jazeera, about State Department officials who helped cover up the fact that Israel was blocking humanitarian aid. And there were some officials who resigned, who made the moral choice to resign because they could not go along with these policies that they knew would facilitate and prolong this genocide. Matthew Miller, until the very last day, followed the orders to aid and abet war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. And he has to deny it's a genocide, because otherwise he would be implicitly admitting that he took part in a genocide. Right. Unfortunately, at least in this world, at this time, Matthew Miller is not being held accountable. In a just world, he would be at least investigated for as an accessory to war crimes and genocide. But in the world we live in, he is being rewarded, and he's now a partner in the Washington lobbying firm and influence peddling firm Via Novo, where he's going to monetize his experience covering up war crimes and genocide for Israel. And you can see there the page advertising his services at Via Novo, which as part of its pitch to potential clients says, quote, Via Novo is a strategic advisory firm for high-stakes brand, policy, and crisis issues. For 2 decades, we have helped some of the world's most recognized names shape public opinion and media conversation, win legislative fights and invest battles, manage crises and litigation, and expand across markets and borders. So just how disgusting, immoral, and depraved is that he goes from lying to perpetuate genocide to selling his services as a so-called spokesperson to whatever unsavory corporations or governments may come to Via Novo as clients.
I mean, that's a very regular pattern that we see with former State Department, officials, government spokespeople. They go on to become, anchors at MSNBC, or private sector consultants or think tank members, continuing to do in private what they did in public, just making a lot more money doing so. Always failing, lying upwards. And he's not the only colleague of, he's not the only one in the former Biden administration that is acquiring large sums of money to continue to toe the pro-genocide line. Matthew Miller's colleague, Vedant Patel, has been hired by pro-Israel lobbying firm SKDK, as reported by the website Sludge. Do you want to talk a little bit about Vedant? Remind us of his work.
Well, you can see the image of him there on the screen. I'm going to spare us one of his a clip of any of his press conferences where he just lied outright, constantly denying Israeli crimes or justifying them or blaming the victims, the same sorts of things that Matthew Miller did for all those 15, 16 months of the Biden administration's active role in this genocide. But according to Sludge, this website. Vedant Patel, who spent much of the Biden administration defending Israel's military actions in Gaza as State Department spokesperson, has landed a new job, senior vice president at 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜, a Democratic consulting firm that is also a registered foreign agent for Israel. During his time at the State Department, Patel effectively served as a public defender of Israeli policy as the administration stood firmly behind Israel despite mounting casualties and global condemnation. Now at 𝐓𝐡𝐞, he joins a company explicitly hired to do the same, conducting press outreach and protecting Israel's image, only this time on Israel's payroll. And we can actually see that. I looked up 𝐓𝐡𝐞's most recent FARA filing. This is the Foreign Agents Registration Act filing that the firm has to make with the US government. And if you scroll down, Tamara, just to line 4 there, you can see that the name to line 4, you can see the name of the principal client of 𝐓𝐡𝐞 is the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And Tamara, if you then scroll down to the last 2 pages of this document, you'll see that it lists the very last 2 pages all the way down. There we go. Yeah, you can just stop there. You can see this is a list of all the media organizations that this Israeli government lobbying firm has reached out to on behalf of the Israeli government. And you can see what this firm does. It reaches out to all the mainstream media we know on behalf of the Israeli government, likely putting pressure on them, spinning stories, putting forward lies. And there you see ABC, BBC, NBC, NPR, MSNBC, Wall Street Journal, you name it, they're on that list. And so Vedant Patel was just until a few months ago working officially for the United States government, and now he went immediately to working officially for the Israeli government. I mean,
incredible.
It's all this corruption, this influence peddling is all done in the open. And this is what you have to think about when they're up on these gigs with these corrupt influence peddling firms pay far more than a government salary. So actually, when they are up on that podium lying to cover up genocide, they're actually auditioning for these jobs. When they're on the podium, that's their job interview for these lobbying firms. And what that is that they're getting paid now is blood money. Their salary is paid for with the blood of all those thousands of Palestinians that even Matthew Miller admitted could have been saved, could be alive today if the Biden administration had done what it could do, if the Trump administration does what it could do right now and stop this genocide.
All those media, that only covered 3 days. When you were scrolling down on that document, it would only covered 3 days. That's how much lobbying they were doing.
Right, and they have to file those FARA reports regularly. So if you were to look through all the FARA reports, you'd see all their activities, all their meetings on behalf of the Israeli government. So, whatever the period was for that report, that's what it covers.
It's incredible.
Yeah. Just astonishing, even though it shouldn't be, because this is how the system operates. This is how it's engineered. This is how these people get to where they are, lying and shilling for colonialism and genocide and empire, of course. Let's turn to a brief discussion. There have been new reports of Israel supporting Palestinian collaborator groups in Gaza. I mean, this is not a new thing. There have been these kind of collaborationist armed gangs. We've seen our contributors on the ground in Gaza talk about these armed gangs that are disrupting aid deliveries, that are looting humanitarian aid trucks, that are working with the Israelis. But what's different, what's new about these reports, and why is it significant that they're coming out right now, that Israel is actually admitting to some sort of collaboration?
Well, earlier today, the former Israeli Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman made a headline-grabbing claim in the Israeli media, and he said that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is arming groups that he described as ISIS-linked criminal gangs in Gaza in order to fight Hamas. Lieberman, of course, has been in coalition governments with Netanyahu in the past, but he's now his political rival and in opposition. And if we could look at the first story, this article from Ynet, the English version of Ynet, came out just before we went on air, and it explains the story. A couple of quotes from it. The operation, led by the Shin Bet Internal Security Service, is described as planned and managed with the goal of reducing Israeli military casualties while systematically undermining Hamas through targeted strikes, infrastructure destruction, and the promotion of rival local forces. An unnamed senior official told Ynet, quote, "It's a calculated effort. While it'll take time to judge its success, it clearly disrupts Hamas's ability to maintain the deterrence and security once enjoyed. Eventually, it could open the door to new governing alternatives." End of quote. And so, yeah, I mean, this is something that's been talked about for quite a long time now, for many months. And this is it's kind of a confirmation, or at least it aligns with that. It's it's the actual, and as a former Israeli minister talking about it. And according to Ynet, he actually did that against military censorship. As we know, all Israeli press is censored by the military. And according to this Ynet article, quote, "The initiative," in other words, the arming of these gangs in Gaza, "was publicly exposed on Thursday when former Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman violated military censorship in disclosing that Israel had armed a Gaza clan fighting Hamas. The censorship office then cleared part of the information for publication, but security officials said the damage had already been done. The Prime Minister's office did not deny the report, stating only that Israel is working to defeat Hamas through various means, following the recommendations of all security chiefs." And it notes, during his term as defense minister, Lieberman had backed similar efforts in Syria, arming rebel factions aligned with Israeli interests. Interestingly, if we can go to the next article, the English version of this article plays down the sort of ISIS aspect of the story. And you can see here, this is an auto-translate of the Hebrew version, which is headlined, according to Lieberman, Netanyahu formed 5 ISIS-identified militias in Gaza. Prime Minister's obviously not deny. Obviously, it's a machine translation, so it's a little bit janky there. Yes, so it's so, allegedly, according to Lieberman, this militia in question, led by a man called Yasser Abu Shabab, is allegedly affiliated with ISIS. And it is that aspect is mentioned only in passing in the English version. And today's reports in the Israeli press align with what Palestinians have been saying for a long time now. The Palestinian analyst and writer Mohammed Shahada, who's with the European Council of Foreign Relations, posted a thread to X back in November last year. And in it, he accused Israel of, quote, aiding ISIS-linked terrorists and criminals to sow chaos and famine in Gaza, and named the same man who's come out in the press reports today, Yasser Abu Shabab, as being the leader of this militia, which is now reportedly working in collaboration with Israel in Gaza. And also that same month, February 2024, the Washington Post reported that armed criminal gangs in Gaza had been looting UNAID trucks. I think we have that headline as well. If you've got that tomorrow, yeah, thank you. And they'd been doing. You can see the headline there: gangs looting. This from November last year. Gangs looting Gaza aid operate in areas under Israeli control, aid groups say. So yeah, these gangs had been looting UNAID trucks, and our friend Abu Bakr Abed, has also reported on this for us. And they'd done this under the protection of Israeli forces, as viewers can see from this article. Next tweet. So more recently, last month, Mohammed Shahada also posted this photo of Yasser Abu Shabab, the leader of this militia, reporting that his militia had set up checkpoints in Rafah under Israeli protection and had been fitted out with brand new military equipment. You can see in these photos and others that are circulating online at the moment. And notably, this equipment looks very similar to other equipment issued to the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. And finally, the final tweet. We've got a video, but Yasser Abu Shabab also came out in the open this week, and he posted a video online. It was posted with him actually appearing in the video, claiming, and in it he claims to act as a legitimate authority. And he called on residents of Rafah to return to Rafah, saying that there are camps being set up under Israeli military surveillance and promising them aid. So, in effect, aided by Israel, this militia seems to be looting UN aid, stopping it from getting to Palestinians, and then actually using it as a lure to trap Palestinians in concentration camps, effectively, under the ultimate control of Israel. And as Nora detailed in her news report at the start of this week's live stream, the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, a US and Israeli-backed organization, began operations last month in Rafah. Desperate people seeking food aid from them came under Israeli fire, and they've killed more than 100, as Nora detailed. Now, with the Israel-backed Yasser Abu Shabab militia setting up new camps in Rafah, it all looks to be part of a trap to concentrate Palestinians in one area, making it easier for them to be killed by Israel. So regardless of whether or not these groups are ISIS affiliated, it seems pretty sure that they're actually Israel affiliated. I think that's the most salient point, and much like the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, Israel has for decades been on a search for reliable native agents, and this is, of course, a common strategy as old as colonialism itself.
I mean, I'm always very curious about the timing of this. I mean, Avigdor Lieberman, he is a genocidal fascist. I mean, he was the one who, when he was an MP, he came up with the idea of rounding up all the Palestinian citizens of Israel, and drowning them in the sea. Why would he be the one at this time?
Yeah, it's a good question.
To try and leak this information that actually isn't new. I mean,
his criticism is that the guns will be turned on Israel eventually, which seems unlikely to me. But he's trying to political point score against his rival Netanyahu.
Yeah, I think that's the key point here. I mean, there is new information in the sense that this is now confirmed, really, basically from Israeli sources. The fact that it was under Israeli military censorship and that he violated censorship and they cleared it for publication is confirmation that this is true, that Israel is backing these groups, and Netanyahu couldn't deny it. So, what was assumed in the past, what was likely in the past is now confirmed to
Yeah.
the extent that these groups are working directly with Israel. So I think that's what we can say is new. But I think Asa's right, because we also had Yair Lapid, another Israeli opposition politician, nominally opposition politician, coming out making the same point, that they say their argument is Netanyahu basically allowed Hamas to flourish, and then Hamas attacked us. And now, without any strategic discussion, without any real, sense of what might happen, he's doing the same with other groups. He's arming other groups who will then use their guns against us. And this all points to the sense that Netanyahu is more politically vulnerable than he has been in a while, and they want to bring down the government.
Yeah.
And so that, I think that's what's going on here. But often, I think here there's 2 points to make here that I think are important. One is, often we get information, real information that reveals hidden truths from Israelis attacking each other. That's a pattern we've seen in the past. A lot of the October 7th revelations come because of Israelis attacking and sniping at each other, and again thinking it's all in their secret language and no one else is going to hear it. And the other thing is, again, to underline that point that Asa made, that this has been a long-standing Israeli strategy in Palestine and in other countries that Israel occupies. So in Palestine, there has always been a search for Palestinian collaborators. The village leagues in the 1970s to set up local collaborator bodies in the West Bank, then basically turning the PLO into Israel's subcontractor in the Oslo Accords, and then developing that further with Abbas, but also in Lebanon with the so-called South Lebanon Army, which was the proxy militia that Israel set up and supported for more than 2 decades, from the late 1970s until the Israeli occupation collapsed, thanks to the resistance in 2000. But then again in Syria, as Asa acknowledged there, with what came out in terms of Israeli support for ISIS and Al-Qaeda linked militias in Syria. So this is a long-standing Israeli strategy.
Yeah, and I'm sure we're going to hear a lot more about what this all means and how it's going to play out. Is there anything else we want to say about, where we are right now in terms of the growing global revulsion at Israel? Ali, you wrote and published a post this week about a new survey. It kind of goes back to our interview with Craig Mokhiber, talking about, Israel becoming, because of public pressure and because of this, global revulsion at this genocide, being more and more isolated. And so it means that we have to keep, putting more and more pressure on the levers of power to further isolate, to sanction Israel, to stop these weapons from being manufactured and delivered and then dropped on the homes of Palestinian children. Talk about this survey, what some of the key points are.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight this. I guess it's a good news story in a way, and we all need that. But the Pew Research Center, which is this very mainstream US-based research center, did a survey in 24 countries around the world, including in Latin America, Europe, Asia. And the only country in the immediate vicinity of Palestine that they included is Turkey. And I suppose doing any more surveys in the region would have been redundant, because you would have gotten unanimity. But what it found is that Israel's more unpopular and viewed more negatively than ever. And these shifts are significant in some areas. They say, for example, in 20 of the 24 countries surveyed, around half of adults or more have an unfavorable view of Israel. Around 3/4 or more hold this view in Australia, Greece, Indonesia, Japan, the Netherlands, Spain, Sweden, and Turkey. And it was really remarkable. I mean, some things stood out. For example, among the European countries they surveyed, Israel is viewed most negatively in the Netherlands, with 78% of the public viewing it negatively, which is really remarkable because the Netherlands, in terms of its government, has always been one of the most pro-Israel countries. And the numbers across Europe are very high. Spain, 75%, Sweden, 75%, Germany, 64%, which is really remarkable, again, given the unanimity in support of Israel among the German political class. But again, that explains why there's so much violent repression in Germany. If the population were on board with the pro-Israel, pro-genocide policy, you wouldn't need to send the police out to beat people up all the time and to censor people and to take them to court and so on. Even Hungary, whose government is very staunchly pro-Israel. Remember that Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban a couple of months ago welcomed Netanyahu to Budapest, defying the International Criminal Court arrest warrant for Netanyahu. Even in Hungary, a majority of people view Israel negatively. And in all of these countries, except two, Israel's negatives are far, far higher than its positives. So it has net negative ratings virtually across the world. Turkey wins the prize, so to speak, with Israel with 93% of the population viewing Israel negatively and only 4% viewing it favorably. But there were some other notable results. In the US, for example, for the first time ever, at least the first time that I've ever seen in decades of following this issue and in all the polls I've seen, a majority of Americans now view Israel negatively. Over the last decade or so, we've seen a lot of polls showing that subsections of the US population, whether it's people who lean Democrat, younger people, people of color, majorities view Israel negatively or support Palestinian rights. But this is the first time we see a majority of US adults overall viewing Israel negatively. That is really a historic shift. And what's also interesting is that there is a break on the American right. Pew observes that in many of the countries where it conducted the surveys, people who place themselves on the left have a more negative view of Israel than those on the right. But this ideological gap is most pronounced in the US, where 74% of liberals have a negative view of Israel compared with 30% of conservatives. But there's something really interesting here, because Pew did a survey focused on Americans back in April, and there they found a sharp rise in the number of Republican voters who view Israel unfavorably. It rose from 27% to 37% just since 2022, indicating that Israel really is losing support across the political spectrum. And we can see this in terms of public discourse, in that there has been a notable new phenomenon of prominent right-wing commentators such as Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, and Judge Andrew Napolitano voicing skepticism and sometimes really harsh criticism of Israel and US support for Israel that once seemed unthinkable. So I really do think that there are some fundamental shifts going on here. As we discussed with Craig Mokhiber, it's frustrating how slow these filter through into action, but they are doing so. And we did see some action this week. Spain canceled a major $310 million arms deal with Israel's Rafael to buy Spike anti-tank missiles, and that's not likely to be the last such action. So things are changing, and I think that we can take heart from that, and that should encourage us.
It really should. Thanks for that, Ali. And before we go, let's take a look at the website. There's so much that we have published this week. We have just several really incredible features by our writers in Gaza. they're excruciatingly beautiful and moving and devastating to read. So please go read those features, including one by Donia Abusita, who we had on the program last week, of course. 3 pieces of Israeli shrapnel. She talks about her family and the injuries that her loved ones have experienced. And then we have just some fantastic news reports, analyses. We have a new podcast from last week where students at USF here in San Francisco and MIT have successfly pressured their administrations to divest from certain Israeli companies. Give that a listen. And then, of course, sign up for our email list up at the top. And yes, Ali?
Yeah, I just want to highlight, if I can, Nora, just
Yeah.
a couple of stories, I think. I mean,
Yes.
you're right. It's all amazing. And I'm so proud of all the journalism and writing that we're able to publish. But just a couple of pieces that really stand out for me. The reportage by Khalid al-Karshali in Gaza, Barely Any Flour, No Meat. And he talks about the struggle to survive the famine, especially people trying to prepare for a little, it's some way to mark the Eid al-Adha, which is beginning, which is in the next
tomorrow,
couple of days. Beginning tonight in the region, and that's a very tough piece to read, but I'm very glad that Khalid continues to report from the ground in Gaza. The piece by Dalal Yassin gives some coverage, some analysis of the situation in Lebanon, where Mahmoud Abbas recently visited and is trying to disarm Palestinians there. Just very bizarre moves by Abbas. Some great analysis by Yassin about Abbas's attempts to assert authority and legitimacy there, which seem doomed to fail. So it's a bit of a puzzle why he'd do that. There's also a piece just published by our colleague Michael Brown on the genocidal language by Israeli groups like far-right groups like 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜, whose new slogan that they were touting on Israel's so-called Jerusalem Day is "No victory without a Nakba." And what Michael focuses on is the support that these groups and the support that these phenomena are getting from US politicians and from US political groups. So again, highlighting the complicity there. So there's just a great deal of extraordinary work that I'm very proud that all of our viewers, listeners, and readers enable us to publish with their support. So thank you so much for helping us get this information out. We can't say it enough. We can't do it without you.
That's right. And if you are so moved and are able, hit the donate now link up at the top there. And especially, it really helps, especially with our monthly donations. And thank you to all of our monthly donors for stepping up and continuing to support this publication and our contributors in Gaza. It goes directly to them. Anything you want to say about our monthly contributors, Ali?
Just to thank everyone for all your support. I usually like to have a list of names to thank some people by name, but I don't have those in front of me today. We'll do that next week. But we appreciate each and every person. And also just to say Eid Mubarak, happy Eid to a happy and meaningful Eid to everyone who will be celebrating.
Yes. And I want to give thanks, as always, to Tamara Nassar, our director and producer of this program and all of the live stream and podcast episodes. Thank you, Tamara. Ellie Gerzon for social media, Michael F. Brown for fact-checking, Pierre Loisel for our, we had our inaugural episode on KPFA in the San Francisco Bay Area this past week, and we're going to be on every Tuesday at 11 in the morning at KPFA. It's really nice to be back on their airwaves as well. And we are also streaming all over the world, and in Canada. I think there's 5 different radio stations that pick up this broadcast, either the news or our condensed version of this episode. So thank you to everyone who's picking that up. Thank you to everyone at the Electronic Intifada, all of our staff, and thank all of you on behalf of myself, Jon, Ali, Asa, and Tamara. Thank you, and we will see you next week.